Stewart.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On behalf of New Zealand First, I rise to speak to the Tobacco Plain Packaging Amendment Bill. This is a very thought-provoking piece of legislation. And in New Zealand First, now I'm not a smoker, we will be supporting it only to select committee at this stage. It's important, we believe, to get the views of the submitters on a bill such as this because it can have unintended consequences, both positive and negative. We know that tobacco is responsible for 6 million deaths globally annually and 5,000 in New Zealand, so Ian Lees-Galloway was saying. There's no doubt that in New Zealand First, we want to see the smoking rates in our country continue to decline as well. But there are many aspects to look at with this legislation, and we're going to be looking at those very closely. We know for a fact that many smokers purchase quite elaborate containers to put their cigarettes into. So are these containers going to be allowed to be sold? Of course they will. So the tobacco and the cigarette container will still look just as good as it always has done, because who wants that horrible eye or that mouth in their pockets? Currently too, we know that retailers have had to spend quite a lot of money to ensure that the tobacco products aren't visible in the stores, and that's a move which we also support. But we don't want to punish the retailers even further, creating a situation where they've got to have further costs in order to conform to this law. After all said and done, it is a legal product. Research in this area is pretty mixed, and it's from relatively small studies. The results very, very mixed. Not a clear indication. In many of the studies, there's an assumption right at the outset of harm reduction or participants giving support for plain packaging without the evidence to back it up. We know too that the conclusions of the reports are very different depending on who is paying for the actual report to be written. New Zealand would be the second country in the world to approve plain packaging after Australia, and we're likely to meet the same legal challenges. And I know the Herald article in December last year outlined it clearly. New Zealand was and I quote from the article, New Zealand was also likely to face legal challenges if it followed Australia's lead, and officials have estimated the cost of a legal dispute as between $2 million to $6 million, not including compensation if the case was lost. So something else to consider. It's also interesting to note that the idea of plain packaging for legal highs wasn't included in the Psychoactive Substances Bill. And their packaging is very colourful. And if plain packaging is effective in reducing the appeal of harmful substances, when are we going to see amendments to how legal highs are actually being sold? And, as Mr Banks pointed out, what about alcohol? What about fast foods? What about sugar products? They're all causing harm to our people. So when are we going to take the next step? So New Zealand First questions as to whether plain packaging is the best use of money to prevent youth uptake. Because preventing uptake should basically be the primary focus for our young people. On another aspect, we have also been made aware that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cigarettes are actually flown into New Zealand at the end of the calendar year to take advantage of the annual 10% increase in excise duty. We hear that the amount of cigarettes brought into New Zealand in the pre-Christmas period is in excess of 6 months' worth of normal consumption. So when will this loophole also be closed? And we're quite concerned about that. We want to see some action on smoking. I'm not a smoker. I don't particularly approve of smoking myself. And we believe that prevention is the primary way to actually go. And we question whether or not this measure is going to get the results that we would like. So, we are going to be supporting this bill to select committee so that we can get an opportunity to hear the opinions of the submitters. At this stage, we have more questions than we have answers. And we're going to be listening for evidence from the submitters, not emotions. We'll be looking for real evidence and not prejudice. So at this point in time, we'll take the first step and then reconsider from there on. Thank you.
Shane Arden.
Mr Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise in support of the tobacco plain